We have a great panel today with those on the inside in Sacramento, as well as former experienced teachers who are observing things in the field. So we're going to explore the state's role with Common Core, what we've done right and what needs to be done. Let me, as Tom mentioned, Deb Sigmund was unable to be here, so let me introduce the panels quickly for you. Nancy Brownell is Senior Fellow for Common Core Systems Implementation with responsibilities for working for both CDE and the State Board on transitioning to the Common Core. She's had many years of experience as a teacher, administrator, and educational leader. Paula Carroll was appointed in January as one of 4 Senior Assessment Fellows to broaden collaboration and communication between the Department of Education and school districts on implementing the new state's testing system, including the field tests, Smarter Balance field tests we took this spring. She retired after 35 years in education, including roles as teacher and principal and district assessment and accountability director before going to the San Joaquin County Office of Education. Erin Gabel is Chief Education Consultant for California State Senate President Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg, where she advises on issues of preschool, early learning, kindergarten, K-12, and higher education, the whole gamut. Before that, she was Director of Government Affairs for State Superintendent Tom Torlakson. Barbara Murchison leads the Common Core Systems Implementation Office and Common Core Integrated Action Team at the Department of Education. She collaborates with diverse groups to support the implementation of the activities described in our Common Core standards and implementation plan for the state. She taught 17 years in California public schools to a diverse array of students in multicultural and multilingual settings. Rick Simpson is Deputy Chief of Staff for Assembly Speaker Tony Atkins. Rick has more than 35 years working in and around the state capitol, primarily on issues of education. He has served for the senior advisor for no fewer than 8 Assembly Speakers. So what I like is for each of you to take, 5-7 minutes, just to talk about where we are with Common Core from your perspective. And Barbara, why don't you start?
Right. Well, good morning, and thanks to David Plank, Pace, and all the other organizers involved in bringing us together today to share what we know about what's happening in the field. I wear a number of hats at the department, but one of them is the administrator of the Common Core Systems Implementation Office, and part of my work there is to do presentations, provide technical assistance, and try and communicate with diverse education stakeholders and collaborate with them to support the implementation activities described in the plan. I guess I can talk a little bit about what I'm hearing from teachers. Over the last couple of years, I've probably spoken with, provided workshops to, and presentations to thousands and thousands of teachers. Right now, the department is engaged in the implementation of a National Education Association grant. We're working with California Teachers Association and the Comprehensive Center at West Ed to go out and do Common Core professional learning events with teachers across the state. And although we do receive a lot of calls from folks in our Common Core office, out in the field when we get to be with teachers, we're hearing a lot of enthusiasm for this work. I mean, I think folks are very excited about the promise of these standards and their potential to transform teaching and learning across the state and to really have students well prepared for life after high school. They're very excited about that. Obviously, the flip side of that is like, wow, we've got a lot of work to do. So I think there are a lot of us, I think we echo that at the department, like this is one of the most exciting times that any of us have lived through in terms of, an education remodeling. But at the same time, it's like, wow, there is a lot of work to be done. But again, just a lot of enthusiasm in the field for moving forward.
Thank you, Paula.
As one of 4 senior assessment fellows, I can tell you from being in county offices, curriculum meetings, regional assessment networks, meeting with parents, districts, and other gatherings that the feeling about the field test is very positive, and much to our delight. I think a lot of people are very apprehensive about what would happen and that our schools weren't technologically able to experience an online field test for students. This is so different than what's been in the past. As Tom said, we tested 3.1 million students out of 4 million that were tested nationally. That means that California tested 73% of all students tested in the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium. That is truly amazing. And most states chose to just test 10% of their students. We tested 97%. So in asking the different districts, mostly the test coordinators and district coordinators, how do you think this went? Our test contractor issued a survey during the middle, near the end of the test window, and we'll do another one now that's completed. 95% of the local educational agencies indicated that they felt the field test went well or very well. Now, like any elephant in the different parts and you touch it, there are pockets, there are school districts, there are places that experience more success than others. But overall, the test went much better than they thought it would go. And from our findings, there appears to be no significant technological barrier to it happening. Is it all in place? No. Do districts want to see some other things happening with technology? Yes. But they felt that the experience they had would lead them to identify what those issues were. The kids were more engaged. They appeared to like the test. They were taking it seriously. It was difficult for students to change the way they demonstrate what they know. For example, how many of you know how to draw an inference? Well, that means something to you, but to a fourth grader, they're looking, let me see, how do I move my mouse to draw an inference? So we're needing to do some work with students about what these terms are, how you demonstrate it. This isn't scratch paper, how do I show that? They're thinking critically. There was some student fatigue, deep levels of thinking, and for the teachers as well. This was very, very new. The charter schools that were site-based reported that they felt very well supported and felt they did a good job, though they felt that the non-site-based charters would probably need a little bit more support. So this field test gave teachers, administrators, parents, students the opportunity to identify what they needed to do to be ready for the operational test, from the Common Core state standards, the rigor, the actual technique of how do I demonstrate how this happens, and the learning activities and in-classroom assessment that needs to change. So the districts also reported that they were very happy with the support that they received from their district, from their county office, and from the state. They just would like it a little bit earlier. They reported that they would like more direction in how to support students with disabilities, in offering the designated supports and accommodations that are available in the testing and need to be available during teaching. So the contractors, the senior assessment fellows, the county offices, the Department of Education have designed a coordinated, prioritized plan to support the districts next year. And this, I can tell you from being at the site level and the district level and the county level, that this coordinated effort is truly a wonderful thing to support the LEAs who are out there, and one that is the strongest that I've seen in a long time. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Erin, please.
Good morning. I don't know how many of you are going to join me and go back to your desk and figure out how to draw an inference. I can't wait till my son's in third grade and I learn. So just taking a little bit of a different angle, so we were hearing about how instruction is being impacted and how we're looking at teachers, looking at the tests. From my perspective, and Rick and I will probably tag team on this a little bit, we've been thinking a lot about the state systems and the role of the state and how it has or has not been moving forward with this change over the last few years. And what I like to remind folks is the subsidiarity predated the transition to the local control funding formula. It started with Common Core implementation in the state of California. Because we adopted the standards at the height of the Great Recession, there was very little we could do. It was a very sluggish, very slow start to what we needed to do at the state level in terms of state systems to actually make change happen at the local level around instruction. And of course, and then that's the end goal that makes things very, very challenging. We arguably didn't really start Common Core implementation at the state level until last year, until 2013, when we adopted the new tests, set the new field test into motion, when we put the Common Core block grant on the table for locals. But really, when we said to the federal government, no, we're going to shift our accountability system, we're going to shift our testing system, there's some space at the local level, and we're going to make this change happen. So the fact that the amount of progress that has been made, I think, is pretty amazing, considering the short amount of time that we've really been focused on the goal, and it makes you realize the enormity of what we have in front of us. So we've adopted the standards. We've put the frameworks in place. We've adopted a testing system that is still in progress, and I think we were all very pleasantly surprised at how well the field test went in this first year, but we know that's going to be an enormous shift for both students and teachers in the long run. We've got the need to figure out where this is all going to go vis-a-vis our accountability system with interactions with the local control accountability plan and with the API currently suspended while we're making this transition. What is all of this going to look like as we move forward? And I think the biggest question we have in front of us right now is, what do we continue to expect to be the state role in a world of subsidiarity, in a world where we know that at the end of the day, it's the instruction in the classroom, in each classroom, that's going to make the difference. What do we expect from the state for infrastructure to move the ball forward, and what's missing from what we have done so far? And so I think we think, check, we've got the standards, check, we've got the tests moving, accountabilities in progress, but do we expect the state to have a role around professional learning, around professional development, and around the systems that support high-quality instruction statewide? Or do we expect that to be a district-by-district, school-by-school infrastructure that needs to be maintained and funded? I think that's a huge question we haven't answered or addressed yet at the state level that we probably should talk about a little bit today, and I know that we would like to hear your feedback about that issue. Before I won't blabber anymore, for those of us who are professional watchers, we go into schools, and I'm not a teacher, I'm a watcher. I go in and I'm listening and I'm watching what's happening. So often the context in which we get feedback is very artificial, right? There's a whole dog and pony show when we show up at a school campus, or when a group comes in or a survey comes in, because it's very loaded, the answers that we hear. They want us to hear Common Core is going well, or they want us to hear that they need more money, or there's always a goal involved. So I was very intrigued to go visit my son's future kindergarten class, and to go visit his school, which will remain nameless, and to hear from the teachers and from the principal, who did not know where I worked, and at the time was working for my former boss, Tom Torlickson, to hear their impression of where Common Core was going. And so that's what I want to leave with for the panel, which was the incredible amount of excitement that I heard from the principal and from the teachers. And when they said, for the first time in longer than I can remember, we've been asked to experiment with what it means to learn. And we've been asked to think creatively about how we want to design our curriculum, about how we want to work together, and how we want to make learning a deeper experience. And this was just in response to questions coming from other parents who were sort of like, what is this Common Core thing? And are we doing it in this school? And to hear that from the teachers, to hear the excitement while they said, and by the way, yeah, we don't have the professional development yet in place. We don't have our textbooks yet, but we're doing it anyway. That's what they said. We're doing it anyway. We're going to figure it out because it's the right thing to do, and we're really excited about it. And so I think I was a little afraid of what I heard and also very encouraged by what I heard. And I think it might, in many ways, from what we've been seeing from the surveys, very representative of what's happening in classrooms around the state.
Thank you. Rick, give us your perspective from across the aisle.
Well, I didn't know what Erin was going to say, but I want to pick up on that from a couple of standpoints. One is, we've seen this movie before. This is not the first time we've tried to implement content standards in California. We did back in the late 1990s, the first time we actually adopted statewide content standards. And if you recall, back then, we had an infrastructure. We had ongoing funding for classroom books and materials. We had an ongoing programs for professional development, all the sort of infrastructure things you need to do to embed the content standards themselves into teacher professional development, into classroom learning. And as Erin correctly pointed out, we adopted the Common Core standards in the height of the recession. And first of all, the infrastructure had gone away in a sense because we allowed districts to use that money to keep their budgets afloat, so you really didn't have that infrastructure. And then last year, we put that infrastructure in the LCFF blender and just kind of, chewed it up and spread it out as part of the formula. So it is more of a challenge, clearly, to do the implementation. A couple of things. One is we don't know, I don't think we're going to know, and that's why I want to hear from the practitioners about when the Common Core content standards have actually been implemented into everyday classroom instruction. I don't know how we determine that, but that seems to me an important thing. Superintendent indicated a little while ago that he is going to be asking for additional state funding in next year's budget. Probably a good idea, but we have no idea how much is enough, what it's going to take to actually do it. And related to that, picking up on kind of what Erin said toward the end, I think we need to think self-consciously about what comes first and what comes second. For me, testing comes second. Implementing Common Core is not about testing. Implementing Common Core is about making sure that teachers have the professional development, the students have the books and materials in the classroom, having Common Core embedded in your everyday classroom instruction is, to me, what matters. The assessment of it is interesting and important, and I'm glad we're having an assessment system that is aligned to our content standards. As you recall, we didn't have that first time around in the 1990s, but that to me comes second. So in looking at future funding to implement Common Core, my priority, frankly, would be to make sure we have sufficient professional development for our teachers and other school-based staff to make sure that the students have textbooks on whatever it is, instructional materials they're going to use that are aligned to the Common Core standards, that implement the kind of instruction that the kindergarten teacher that Erin talked to mentioned. So that to me is, assessment is interesting. I would have done that after we make sure that we have the content in the classrooms that is then going to be assessed.
Thank you. Nancy?
Thank you. Good morning. And on behalf of the State Board of Education and President Mike Kirst, welcome to the morning, and thank you for all the work that you do out there on behalf of students in our state. I've had a great opportunity over the last 2 years to be working with both the superintendent and with the state board on Common Core implementation at large, with a strong emphasis on communication with the field. And I've had the pleasure of traveling around, talking with school board members, talking with administrators, talking with parents, talking with teachers about what exactly are we doing right now? How are we moving forward? And similarly to what Rick said, in any great time of transition, there's always a lot of anxiety. I've been an educator in this state for a very long time, and hence the senior fellow at title. The notion that the degree to which in the late 70s, 1978, for example, Gary Hart, one of my former bosses, introduced and the legislation around minimum proficiencies. We began to think about what is it that parents need to know before their child is in 12th grade, whether they're going to graduate from high school or not. And so this idea that really was about local control then, minimum proficiencies were about where we were heading. Could we declare that students were minimally proficient and graduate from high school? In the 80s and 90s, we began to say, minimally proficient probably, minimally competent probably isn't good enough. What about proficient? Could we reach for proficiency? And over time, we developed a fairly robust system around that, and now we're headed on the college and career readiness path, right? Well, as a longtime educator, the distance between proficient and college and career ready is quite a distance. And part of the, I think, angst and anxiety on the part of parents out there is while they're anxious to move their students forward with a rich array of intellectual growth and a breadth of learning at each grade level, their child still only gets 1 year of kindergarten or one course in biology or one 7th grade math class. And so the perception that, yes, there are changes underway, however, I still need you to be accountable for the success and the opportunities that my child needs this year. And so I think in talking with districts and talking with teachers and talking with parents, the capacity really to understand deeply that we are in the midst of a lot of changes, the degree to which we're trying to have thoughtful, differentiated instruction in every classroom every day for every child, English learners, special needs, advanced learners. All of that is about managing instruction through both the art and the science of teaching and learning, right? It is about being able to make judgments about where students are and moving them forward, and the Common Core identification of what is it we need students to know and be able to do. And I think that's the other part that parents are very excited about as we've heard them, and the tension around the levels of implementation. It's both about the content students know, and it's about how they apply that in a variety of contexts, through the assessment of the end of the year, assessment field test items, for example, but more importantly, it's through the ongoing feedback and assessment information that teachers need to be providing to students all along the way, because you're not going to do well on an end-of-year summative assessment if you haven't had those sort of experiences through the course of the school year. So from the state board's perspective, this idea that implementation is happening in a wide variety of ways, that there really have been multiple entry points into how and where schools and districts began, with professional development for teachers and administrators, supervising them, evaluating, trying to help them grow in their thinking about what does it look like if you have a fully implemented Common Core classroom? What are the characteristics and indicators that would say students are doing well with text complexity, that they're doing well with the math practices? These are the deep, rich conversations that are happening this year, as opposed to last summer, for example. I spent a lot of the summer traveling around to Lake County, to Crescent City, to Ventura, to Los Angeles, to the Bay Area, to Rescue in El Dorado County, and heard a lot of efforts underway that were sort of the big picture of what Common Core is all about and where we're headed. This year, it's been much more about depth and complexity, grade level meetings, people sitting in connected rooms really trying to think about, I've tried some things out this year, this worked, this didn't work, and how am I going to make adjustments in preparing for next year? So from the state board's perspective as well, the Common Core standards are now really embedded in the context of the 8 state priorities, right? It's central to achievement level descriptors. How are we really moving ahead? But it's connected now to all those other pieces that are evident in the LCAPs. So on that note, I'll conclude.
Very good. That's a great jumping off spot. And let me just say, we have plenty of time for your questions. I have mine, but I think I'd rather hear from you. So after I ask a couple, think of yours, and then we can have you come down and ask them. We have plenty of time, about an hour. So let's start off, Nancy, with, and by the way, anyone can jump in on it, wish you would, on these questions, on the issue of professional development, which is really, really hard. And a report by Milbury McLaughlin, which you have before you, and I really encourage you to read it. It's a terrific report of sort of where we are in right now. Talks about the problems of professional development on a number of areas, how difficult it is, and the issue is not just money, which we've talked, but also time for teachers, and also it raises the issue of there's lots of preparation of lesson plans, but sort of what may be missing is the broader curriculum. And I wonder if that jibes with what you're observing, and can comment on you, all three who are out in the field.
Well, I'll start. I mean, I think what's been interesting in listening is we've come off of an era where the textbook really was a good tool. Fidelity to the program was sort of driving the decisions we were making about what is it that how are we going to organize lessons and units and proceed through the pages of a textbook, which, while that model provides one way of really thinking about what is it that students need to learn and be able to do, it limits the capacity, I think, for teachers to have a deeper understanding about the relationship between what is it kids need to know and be able to do, what are the resources and tasks and information I need to help design a learning environment that helps them learn that, and how am I going to make feedback and assessment judgments all along the way. So this year, I think on the one hand, without new mathematics textbooks until the middle of the year, literacy and language development textbooks coming next, is the exploration that teachers in grade level teams with county office colleagues, with their district leadership, to try to build on, pulling from the resources I have, looking at the wide array of resources that are out there, because this is really quite over 40 states involved in this work, that while there is unevenness in the implementation, the learning that has occurred on the part of teachers who came through a time where it was really mostly about the textbook, they've struggled a little bit, but there's been an attempt to say, oh, I have to really think about my planning and delivery for students in a much different way. So I think that learning opportunity has been very helpful, but it really comes down to good leadership at the school level and at the district level, teacher leadership, administrator leadership working together. And that's part of why I think in small rural areas, the county offices and other support providers play a key role. In the larger districts where they have a fairly robust district office staff, they can offer that expertise. But because that expertise is distributed across 310,000 teachers in the state, over 1,000 districts, it's hard to say what they're doing in Calexico and what they're doing in Rescue and what they're doing in Crescent City or what they're doing in Santa Rosa is all the same. So part of it's that local context that matters, but it's also about the leadership and expertise and trying to build on that so that students everywhere are experiencing a more coherent learning. And that's the part that I think makes it hard to know how the implementation is going.
Barbara, Paula, your thoughts on the status of professional development, what you've seen and how difficult it might be?
Yeah, I think, Superintendent Torlakson earlier this morning talked a bit about, wouldn't it be great if we can turn on a light switch? And there's really no light switch for building the capacity of teachers to implement the standards to the depth of rigor that they require. I mean, we hear from some districts who are, feeling anxious that we haven't done things the way we did it last time, which was the state provided professional development, the county offices deployed the professional development, and everyone was professionally developed. This time, we've had a lot of research since that time that shows that professional learning is really a continuous, incremental process. Time has to be carved out. Teachers need a chance to work together to talk about these problems of practice, be able to go out and try it, come back, debrief, incremental growth. It's a continuous process. It's not a couple of hours and then we're developed. We're going to continue to grow and learn throughout the course of our careers. There are a lot of local education agencies in California who are doing that kind of thing, who had the culture of ongoing continuous professional learning well before the Common Core came into existence here in California. And they are not nearly as alarmed at the need for professional development because they were able to just say, okay, well, here's our problem of practice. How are we going to get our kids to these standards? And kind of insert it into their existing culture. And they're not, they know it's a long haul. They know it's not a light switch. So I think it is a huge shift, not just in the standards, but just in the entire system. And I think people are starting to figure out, how do we create a local system where we carve out that time for teachers to come together and really talk about what does it mean to be teaching to these standards, and understanding that it's a process. We talked about the journey this morning. There's no light switch for having that capacity to do this well.
I'd just like to add one short thing, and that is, we're also seeing a different culture being built around online training, and teachers from different areas having access to the same high-quality modules, Professional Learning and Support Division, I see Carrie Roberts here, developing those modules, and local agencies working with their teachers to guide them through that. It's at a time they have decided. It could be facilitated in a way that's specific to that group. So we're thinking a little bit differently than the old sort of stand and deliver too. We're seeing groups of teachers, and they don't even have to be in the same place. So this is something I think we're going to see a lot more developed. Teachers are going to the digital library for Smarter Balance. There are, we're talking about a curriculum or assessment. They need to be together, and Nancy was talking about formative processes and tools. Every time a teacher's interacting with a teacher, they're looking at, what does that student know, what don't they know, what do I need to adjust for that student? That's the kind of ongoing assessment that needs to happen. Though a lot of that's going to be available in the digital library. So there's a little bit of a different look at how we're experiencing professional development.
So the report also mentions that, how difficult it might be for many teachers whose only experience is under No Child Left Behind to adapt to these. And you touched on that by the way teachers are working in groups and the like. One report says when superintendent in a report is saying open court and other reforms of the past were touted as being teacher-proof. We're going to talk about demeaning that approach to teachers, and Common Core is almost exactly the opposite. So, part of the excitement is that they're empowered to have the control, but it is going to be a heavy lift, right? If you can, just basically true.
I think, yeah.
Okay, so Rick and Erin, on this whole issue of, have we gone a little bit too far on subsidiarity in terms of the state's involvement? And, we've approved I'll say it's not adequate enough, $1.65 billion so far, but very little of this went to the CDE to bolster its role and to give it the resources to do whatever it is that we decide that it should be doing. Is the balance off a little bit, Erin?
Well, so first, I'd be remiss if I didn't say none of it went to CDE.
Okay.
So a grand total of $0 have gone to the state level for the development of anything around Common Core support, with the exception of the test. So around involvement in Smarter Balance Consortium and the movement there, that has been the sum total of our investment. So to Rick's point earlier, if we believe within the definition of subsidiarity that we need to define where the authority and the responsibility belongs, right? So if we bought into the philosophy and we believe that as much as possible, decisions need to be empowered at the lowest level, arguably in the classroom, in the hands of a supported and professional and effective teacher, right? But where else does responsibility lie? Because we can't just abrogate our responsibility in the name of the word of subsidiarity. We have to think about the balance. And so I wouldn't argue we've done too much. What I would argue is that we have not been thoughtful enough about what is missing yet within the same philosophy. And so we have to continue to grapple with that issue together about which systems need to either be re-examined or enhanced or disbanded at the state and at the county level in order to support what is happening in every single classroom with fidelity across the state. And that is something I don't think we've been spending enough time doing. We certainly have not put any sort of significant investment in at either the state or the county level to help move that ball forward. And so if we are hearing from districts that they need more support, we need to think very carefully about what that support should look like.
Yeah, so Rick, I'm sure you were in on very closely on the negotiations for this. How is it that not a dollar then went to CD? I mean, the thought process that there would not be no dollars then creates no further involvement of the state. Talk a little bit about that and what your view of that is.
Well, my general view is what we have either done or allowed to happen to the State Department of Education over the last decade or so is shameful. We have one of the smallest state departments of education in the country, both in absolute dollars and certainly in funding per student, per capita. There is an important role for state-level leadership in policy development, in providing the expertise to school districts to implement, whether it's Common Core or whatever policy initiatives might be on their plate. At the risk of somebody tattling to the governor,
No, I would never do.
you know, I don't know if it's skeptical, but I think I remain to be convinced that doing everything under the principle of subsidiarity is a good idea. It's subsidiarity and decentralization of decision-making is a belief system. There's no data to suggest that student outcomes will be better with local decisions as opposed to state decisions. There's no data that says state decisions are better either. There's just no data. So we've sort of engaged in a belief system, and I hope we're correct. But this is a question of educational federalism. That at what level of government is it appropriate to make certain kinds of decisions? And certainly lots of decisions probably ought to be made at the local level. I would argue that a lot of funding decisions ought to be made at the local level as well. We've got this separation between authority and responsibility. The responsibility is at the local level. The authority still, to a large degree, remains at the state level, and we need to figure out the right balance of state versus local. So the bottom line is, I think we should have provided significantly more resources for the State Department of Education, State Board of Education, to provide that leadership, to provide the expertise. That's where the expertise ought to be in a lot of these things.
So thank you. And let's explore this a little bit more. Again, I cite the report which says, quote, local control cannot take the place of a statewide plan and a coherent policy infrastructure along with the resources to support local implementation choices. So the question is, do we have that, statewide plan? And what would be the elements? And not just Erin and Rick, but from your perspective, from what you're hearing in the field, what is it that districts, even though they have this tremendous flexibility and autonomy, what would they like the state to do?
Considering that there is a statewide plan, so I would love to have Barbara and Nancy speak to that. So I think that it would be good. I think one of the questions is how few people actually know there's a statewide plan, because there's been so little infrastructure to discuss it, to distribute it, to really think deeply in every community about what it means and how they would make decisions vis-a-vis the guidance that's in that plan. So anyway, I turn it to the experts.
Well, we do have a statewide plan. It was jointly approved by the superintendent and the State Board of Education back in March of 2012, and is readily available on our Common Core webpage. The timeline you see behind you represents kind of the broad overview of the significant milestones in that plan. I think perhaps what the report is referring to, at this point, it might be worth looking at more discrete smaller plans, like what is the statewide plan for professional learning, what is the statewide plan for moving forward with assessment, what is the statewide plan for communicating with all the stakeholders. I wonder if that's what the report is actually referring to. We do have a large overarching statewide plan for Common Core implementation. And I think we're really in a place right now where we need to hear from local education agencies about what they need it to look like. I mean, the department tries its best to try and find out from folks, how's it going out there? What do you need? But I think the reality is, at the local level, folks are grappling with, how are we going to manage our LCAPs? What does LCFF mean for us? How are we going to go about this Common Core thing? And so when we send out a survey and say this is a voluntary survey, let us know how it's going, anything that's optional right now, I don't think really gets tended to very well at the local level. So we're eager to hear from folks about what they think the state role is in this work henceforth. We've already done, you can see from the timeline, we've done everything that we've been authorized to do, curriculum frameworks, instructional materials adoptions, moving forward with the assessments, development of professional learning modules, and we've done it very well. But as we move towards the end of this transition and into full implementation, that's a question that we're really wanting to hear from other folks. What is it that you would like from us? And then we would hope to get that support from kind of a statewide consensus that that's something that the department should be doing. That's the department's role.
So let's just explore perhaps one, which would be materials. And a lot of the materials, the IQC did the textbook adoption, and there are those out there, experts who are saying none of them are any good right now. None of the textbooks are truly aligned, and professor from Michigan State said, I wouldn't buy any right now. So it's happening on a very random basis, I believe, you can tell me. And is there a role perhaps for the state to be the curator of these materials to provide guidance so that it's not left to overworked teachers who need to do other things as it is? Anybody, any thoughts?
Well, the answer is yes and no.
Okay.
In this time of transition, right, we're trying to create a bit of a neutral zone. We've had a model that was very sort of driven from a much different organizational perspective, and we're transitioning to really try to encourage local districts working with their communities. If we've not learned anything else at the board meetings through January and February, the interest on the part of constituent groups is really quite amazing out there. But coming to 600 people coming to the state board meeting to talk about what they need is probably not nearly as valuable as going to their local school board meetings. And the degree to which the materials are a piece of the resource puzzle, right? It also relies on teacher expertise. It's grade level teams. It's the scope and sequence around a year-long sort of curriculum picture. So in the past, really, the framework documents provide that huge guidance. They continue. The math framework that was adopted last fall, terrific information in there. It's 1,200 pages long. You can pick and choose and find some very good resources. I think there's also been a bit of a false dichotomy that there's a perfect math textbook program out there, or that there will be a perfect ELA, ELD program out there. There are strong ones and there are weak ones. In my 40 years of teaching and learning, there have always been strong materials and weaker materials. And so again, I think that leadership capacity and really trying to help school boards understand that there's a range of the information that's there. I think we're hopeful that having some digital content is going to also be a part of it, but the degree to which the math practices, for example, in mathematics are embedded in some of those new math materials, the idea that, attend to precision is one of my favorite math practice standards. Well, how is a textbook going to help me with that? I get the concept of attend to precision. It's a lifelong skill. It's a complex learning opportunity that doesn't just apply in mathematics. So examining resources through the lens of where are their strengths, where are their weaknesses, and what's the expertise that we're going to need to continue to develop through professional development and learning opportunities, I think is where we are in this transition, because if we're looking for a perfect set of materials, we're probably going to be looking for a very long time.
Yeah, just to build on what Nancy just said, I think we've already referred to the TeacherProof textbooks of the last implementation. And I think folks who have come to believe that the textbook is the teaching are going to be disappointed by any textbook that is put in front of them. So this idea that you will have a textbook that's going to take care of your professional learning, you're going to open that textbook and you're going to have deep mathematical content knowledge that you need to teach the Common Core, I don't know that we'll ever have that textbook. The 31 programs that were adopted by the state board were carefully reviewed by trained reviewers, classroom practitioners, content experts, and found to be aligned to the state board adopted criteria for adopted textbooks. So I don't, they're not a panacea for the implementation challenges, but they're just meant to be a tool. We need the whole professional learning and all kinds of ongoing work to happen in order for those textbooks to be useful.
Great. I'll ask one more question, and then I will turn it over to you. And that is perhaps another role, potential role for the state might be messaging. And Rick, you had mentioned that, because of the, and Tom did too, the delay in accountability, we bought some time in California, and therefore we've avoided some of the battles in New York that others have had. And yet, in the PACE USC poll, which we'll discuss this afternoon, I think a really surprising number of parents who are larger than, in fact, supporters in some ways, oppose, or from what they know of the Common Core, which often is not much, because, the legislature may be fully behind it, but people can turn on Fox News anytime they want. And so there is this sort of current now out even in California. And so is there a role here for the state, CDE, about what it is that we want to tell parents in particular about what we're doing, and even from what you're hearing and dealing with parents in the field?
Absolutely. And there is a communications campaign that's been in development around this, from support for the Californians Dedicated to Education, the CDE Foundation, that has garnered some foundation funds that are continuing to build on the notions of key messages, adaptable content that can be modified and used in local context, and we're partnering with the Ed Coalition members, particularly because what we know about good communication is that it has to come from trusted messengers. And who are the most trusted messengers for many parents? It's their child's teacher or their adolescent's teacher. So the capacity for teachers to be able to talk about what we're trying to do is one critical piece that we're really launching here. We've had some planning. We're in the midst over the next year of really expanding that capacity in partnership with the Ed Coalition members to begin to, again, sort of galvanize folks, because while we've been in a little better place than other states, the opposition has really focused a social media campaign, an incredibly successful social media campaign around all of what's wrong with Common Core. I think the recent study results, when we look at the two questions that people had to respond to, the one question that seemed to be a sort of everything in the kitchen sink, and as those of us that develop surveys know, there's no perfect survey. When you really looked at the choices that people had, it was a little unclear what that messaging meant. But really, the timing in some ways is, as we get into the midst of deeper implementation, the anxiety rises for parents about what's happening for their child, and the degree to which we have a common set of ideas that we can articulate in our local communities is now more important than ever.
Yeah, I think there could be an important state role. I mean, I would echo everything Nancy said. I was going to say that I thought the most powerful spokesperson would probably be the kindergarten teacher that Erin talked to. And you do need to keep in mind that some, I won't say all, but some of the angst that maybe the survey reflects on Common Core is this is also a political issue. This is there were certain folks who were singularly unsuccessful in undermining the president and the support for the Democratic Party with the attacking the Affordable Care Act. Well, this is another thing that is now somehow associated with the president, and even though it came from the NGA and the chief state schools officers, another act try to attack it from a political standpoint. So I think that's some of what you're seeing. I don't know. I'm not a message person. I'm kind of a policy wonk. So I'm not quite sure how the right way to get the message out, but having the classroom teachers, the community leaders, it's got to be almost more of a grassroots kind of thing. You're not going to get that, you're not going to have MSNBC doing the counterpoint on Common Core to Fox. That's not going to get you where you need to.
Right. I think you're right. It's the teachers who need to express the excitement and some of the things they're doing, but I'm wondering if there's a state role. You yourself raised the issue of accountability and the importance of testing, and that perhaps is the message, assuming there's agreement as to what happens in the next couple of years, what that message might be, or reflected in policy from the legislature.
Yeah, I mean, this whole accountability conversation is interesting. I think we definitely did the right thing last year in putting a big timeout in the test score-based accountability, sort of high-stakes decisions attached to standardized test scores. I frankly wouldn't mind at all if it was extended for another year or so. We have a tendency in this state, and I assume the rest of the country, to do kind of, ready, fire, aim. And I don't think that, I think we saw in the late 1990s and early 2000s that did not serve us well. We had, folks were so freaked out about whether it's interventions or personnel decisions or something that's somehow related to test scores for which the teachers hadn't yet been adequately trained. We don't have the quality books and materials in the classrooms. It's not a good. You're not going to get quality teaching and learning in that sort of environment. So I think the timeout we did was well worth it. I think honestly I would extend that until we have some level of confidence that the Common Core content standards themselves really are a part of everyday classroom instruction.
And I would just add that no matter what is happening with the accountability system, we need to be very careful about the messaging when it does come back, because these standards are very different. It's a very different way of learning, teaching, testing, and as we've seen in these other states, it's a hard uphill battle to make that shift, that instructional shift in the classroom, and we have to assume that's going to be reflected in the tests, and it's not going to be reflecting a step backwards. That's part of why the pause button was so important, because there could be no comparability between the old test and the new test, and we needed to prevent that. But no matter what, when the new system comes out, we're going to have to be very clear about what it means, what it actually means, and not be abusing data, twisting it in a way that is actually not helpful to improving instruction for children.
Yeah. Nancy, Barbara, and Paula, are you hearing the same degree of apprehension talking to teachers about they're worried about this as well? The accountability aspect and how they and their schools will be judged the first year?
I don't hear a lot from teachers worried about accountability so much. I think most teachers that I've spoken to are really concerned about how do I make this happen in my classroom for kids, and that they might just be outliers, but I don't think I've had a teacher talk to me about how they will be held accountable to the standards. And I think they're very thankful that they're not like some of their counterparts in other states who were held accountable. Or
Interesting, thank you.
they're feeling very grateful to California's very different implementation plan. They're happy to have been given that time to do this work.
I would say school board members and administrators are a little more anxious about, again, on the opportunity of this journey to make the kind of both large and small scale changes. The question that I hear people asking is, to what extent are the efforts in our district going to be judged to be successful or not? And when we, again, think of designing a new accountability system that takes into account some of the soft skills, for example. Student engagement is critical to the success of learning. Schools and classrooms want to think about student engagement, which also leads to what's the culture of high expectations at our school. How do we support English learners to really be engaged in thinking and rigor in the classroom, but building their language skills. So this tension about we need time to build the new parts of the system that are going to help us get there, ultimately we're going to be judged in an accountability system and by our community members, and that sort of ongoing conversation about both the way that's going to evolve and what the dimensions and indicators are going to be, while we don't have all of that in place yet, is an increasing question that we hear in lots and lots of places in the state.
Great. I see lots of knowledgeable people in the audience, and I encourage you to come down now and share your perspectives and also your questions you may have. The mics are open.
Tell them there's going to be an authentic assessment.
Thank you.
Well, I'll start off. Let's see, Glenn Thomas, trying to be retired. So the legislature did set up some minimal infrastructure, I'll call it around the IQC. So they have some role in instructional materials. They have a big role in curriculum frameworks. Those frameworks, as you alluded, are very rich. And while we have some rollout, some training, it looks to me like that's where a lot more of that could be done with board members, certainly with teachers, and with parents, really, because that's where some of the key messaging could come from. You know, it's such a landmark change to have the ELD English Language Development Standards integrated with basic English language arts standards. Very powerful, potentially. Also, great chance for misunderstanding. So right there we have, and Dr. McLaughlin does mention the county offices as one infrastructure that's maybe underutilized, but I'd be curious, because there is some, you know, it's like starting a few things and then we didn't quite get to the next step, is what it appears to me.
Yeah, thanks. And a great deal of teacher involvement went into the preparation of those. Are they being used out in the field, or is that a resource that's...
It is. I mean, the math framework has been posted online. Again, there isn't necessarily a document. The folks that served on the IQC, on the subject matter panels, the subject matter projects, again, another great infrastructure that, you know, are sort of hobbling along, have some terrific expertise in mathematics, for example, from higher ed, districts and schools, and local community folks. And so the kind of work that they are doing around the use of the framework, but clearly just having a document doesn't do us a lot of good if we can't put it into practice and break it apart in ways that have some executive summaries that allow people to say, well, gee, here's the conceptual understanding. What do I need to think about in first grade when I'm thinking about attend to precision or using mathematical modeling? So I would totally agree that it's another opportunity to take some very good resources and in a very complex text and make it more accessible to many more people, including parents and students.
And the IQC is meeting today to do the final review of the ELAELD curriculum framework. We anticipate that that'll be brought to the board at its next meeting in a couple of weeks and approved, adopted. And we are in the process, the CDE is working with the county offices, the subject matter projects, a variety of other education stakeholders to develop a year-long kind of systematic, continuous, professional learning experience for teachers around that rollout. We're working with the CDE Foundation again to find the resources to help support that effort. So, you know, the intent to roll out these really powerful documents that are full of rich guidelines for folks and give people all kinds of information about how to go about implementing the standards. We've been looking for support to do that from outside of the state. The intent is there.
Good morning. Isabel Garcia with the California Teachers Association. Appreciated all your remarks in this panel about the state perspectives. Even before Common Core was adopted in 2010, we want to recognize and salute the leadership of the superintendent to make sure that teachers have the resources they have to be successful in teaching and our students to be successful in learning. So that, you know, that goes back to the 97, 98 standards, and it's continued. But, you know, we had the draconian cuts with the economies. We've had many setbacks. But I want to, the theme that you have here about professional development, not just for teachers, but for administrators, because we know that it is the continuum, and of course, improving our craft. It's not just a one-size-fits-all, showtime, one time. It has to be relevant to what I'm teaching. It has to be, I have to have the tools to be successful. And the same thing with administrators. So, but getting back to the state perspective, because now that we've collapsed all the professional development block grants and everything, it's a new era, but we have to really look carefully, like you said, I heard, that those districts that have made the commitment to professional development, quality professional development, and where it's what the educators need and what the leaders need, and so it's relevant and ongoing and really transforming to the collaborative time and taking time in the instructional day to do that and creating these robust professional learning communities. Those that are doing those best practices, like you said, are going to continue to do that with materials that are aligned to the Common Core. But where those were maybe, need a little more support, so we'll see going forward. But I think the commitment, what I think I heard was, we have to wait and see. The needs are great, and they're for everybody. So we'll see how this goes, because the enthusiasm is there. We know what we need to do. And we're doing it differently. And of course, I'm sure districts, we have digital, we have all kinds of tools now that we didn't have back in 97, let's say. But the state does have an interest in the workforce here, the teacher workforce and the quality. And just because we're not getting it from Title II of ESEA or the challenges are great, but we're going to meet them because we have the leadership in this state. And in fact, that's one of the reasons we have, Senator Lieu has a bill on professional development for anybody that's providing direct instruction. They deserve and need to get the support. And so that's one bill that we're supporting in the legislature. But I just want to thank you again for all your comments and saying that the state does have a role to play, a strong role in the successful implementation of the Common Core. The whole nation is looking at what we're doing here, and just because we're way down there on the per pupil funding, we won't get to that. That doesn't mean that we can't do it the best we can from where we're at, building on what we know and just, really making that commitment at the county level, at the local level, and of course working with all stakeholders on these issues that you all mentioned and that are in this report. So thank you for your comments.
Thank you for your perspective. It sort of raises, makes me think there is an equity component here that we haven't really talked about. And we do have a constitutional right to equal opportunity education. And I'm wondering, and perhaps all of you can speak to this, particularly observations in the field, that one might assume that schools and districts with the most high-need students may be less positioned to do well with the implementation of the Common Core standards. So is there a state role in both beyond the LCFF funding and the same per pupil funding on the Common Core block grant to take care of it? And maybe Erin and Rick address that. But I also would like to, from your own observations in the field, is it true that it's going to be more difficult for districts with lots of high-need students who have English learners? That's a whole other element. Anyone?
Just a quick addition, because equity obviously is a concern, needs to be a concern for everyone. I think that's one of the reasons why progress towards Common Core implementation was built into the LCAP and into the LCAP's design and as a priority for the state to see where every district was going vis-a-vis Common Core implementation and making that shift and looking at their other standards-based implementation work. So.
Well, and I would say that John, you point out correctly that one of the state roles, state responsibilities, is to deal with equity issues. That was the fundamental issue in Serrano, which was a tax equity case. We have for decades we had the economic impact aid as a categorical program to deal with the demographic and equity issues. And I think if we learn over time that the implementation challenges are more acute in whether it's low-income districts, whether it's suburban districts who don't have much in LCFF, whatever category of districts it might be, I think we have a responsibility to figure out how to address that.
Observations from the field in terms of low-income and in districts with English learners, or how they're faring?
Well, like other times in our history, the work, for example, that we developed in the 07, 08, 09 with support from a grant to look at district intervention under the old regulations around program improvement, for example, and the work that we did with the California County Superintendents and the Department of Education on partnering to say, how do we know more about delivering individual school support? We've learned a lot about district roles and the role of the board and district leadership. The issue that we discovered, not surprisingly, was less functional districts with a lot of uncertainty in the community, with strife on the board, with a lack of governance, are really doing a disservice for the students in their community, wherever that community might lay. And so we do know that in a complex change system that we're trying to implement now, the ways that those other support structures, the state, the technical assistance support, the county offices, other private and nonprofit support providers that are engaged in that day-to-day work to help support and build that human capital, right? That it's all about leadership at every level. And so, I mean, it doesn't take a lot of research to say, if you're a really sort of dysfunctional district, and however that's defined, working on Common Core implementation is going to be harder. And yet, what are the accountability mechanisms that have to be in place so that those districts that need support and guidance are going to be able to get it? And that's a big part of where we have to keep going.
I mean, the LCAP has it, and we will be, but that's several years away, so you've been patient. Thank you.
Sure. Marta, is it on?
Yes.
Okay. Marta Alvarez, San Diego Unified School District. My question has to do with, so obviously today we're focusing on what's happening right now with existing teachers in the classroom, whether they're new or they're senior and tenured teachers with a lot of experience. What is the role of higher education institutions, whether it be through teacher induction programs, teacher training programs, in helping those next teachers that we might see in the coming years, that they may not be right now thinking they want to become teachers, but they will in the next couple of years? What is the role of universities in really helping to shape those teachers so that it's a whole new dynamic, paradigm shift of how kids are being taught, pedagogy? So I would be interested in seeing it because that's a statewide perspective, maybe whether it be legislation and trying to see higher education institutions and their supporting of new teachers.
Thank you for raising that. Yeah. Anyone?
Yes. In fact, that was one of the questions I had when I had looked at the agenda. I thought it would be great to have added the CTC and to hear their perspective about their role in terms of looking at a lot of the work they're doing around accreditation of our higher education partners and of BITSA providers. And I know they are thinking through how is this deeper learning that is at the heart of the Common Core, how is that being embedded into our teacher preparation pipeline programs? So I do think that that's a wonderful voice we should be adding as we continue to have this conversation, as well as those partners that the CTC is working with, sometimes better than others, on making that shift. It's a comprehensive conversation we need to be having.
Yeah. It's well underway in terms of the role that the Commission on Teacher Credentialing plays. We also, through the State Board Office, have a very small National Governors Association grant where we targeted the 4 segments, UC, CSUs, community colleges, and the private and independents, to try to kind of map the landscape, what is happening in teacher preparation. And obviously, the role that the Commission on Teacher Credentialing plays in setting course expectations along with the accreditation system has been in place. I think one of the uncertainties, though, that's out there is from someone who's taught in preparation programs at one time along with induction is the expertise of how to really implement what we're asking teachers to do resides with our current workforce in some ways because it's very exploratory and new moving forward. There's a lot of pieces we have. So while academic preparation programs may have course sequences, some of the folks that are teaching those classes have not delivered this kind of instructional delivery around using more digital. So they're on a steep learning curve as well in being able to both prepare candidates, but it speaks to that partnerships. It has to be the field experiences along with the university preparation and undergraduate programs, right? We know we've got a problem in mathematics. If we're going to really pull off the mathematics Common Core standards, it's what happens in mathematics in grades 4, 5, and 6, right? And we know historically that elementary teachers do not have as much expertise in content knowledge in mathematics. So the notion that how do we build that content expertise along with the changes in pedagogy, along with the emphasis on digital literacy, and have that partnership with the higher ed and the K-12 and the induction programs along with undergraduate is a whole nother sort of piece of the puzzle that we've got to really continue to push over the next couple years.
Thank you. Liz.
Yes, good morning. Fabulous panel. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. I'm Liz Guillen with Public Advocates. I would just like to suggest that, and to advocate, that an important state role is knowing. It's getting the information. And we were successful in ensuring that the information would be collected in the last round of curriculum change. When legislation was passed to require the state to contract with an independent evaluator, especially because we were having high-stakes decisions being made around the California high school exit exam. So within the context of the exit exam, we're collecting the information, and HMRO has continued to provide really good information about that. And the last report was quite an indictment about what is likely to happen if we don't ensure that there is access to all the opportunities to learn that are needed for students to get the Common Core standards and especially to prepare for the assessment. The other piece about information, though, and also a critical state role, is the development of the teacher workforce. That is a state role, and leaving it to locals isn't the best way to accomplish that. So the information about our teacher workforce, we were well on our way to establishing an information system, and that has been defunded. So that needs to come back. We need to understand who's out there, and the state needs that information. If it doesn't collect it and it continues to reject suggestions, proposals to collect it, it's turning a blind eye to it. Thank you.
Can I just build on that?
Go ahead, Sarah.
This is Sarah Lillis from EdVoice, and just building on the idea of the state role in providing information. One reason why I'd probably push back a little bit, Rick, on the idea that assessment should come second is that critically, part of the reason why we were so attracted to SBAC was the idea of interim informative assessments to actually inform what's happening in the classroom. I think that that's critically important. But beyond that, to be able to see what's working and what's not, to be able to look at what happens to students once they leave high school, I think will help really inform teaching and learning and the Common Core and implementation of the Common Core. And to that end, we've struggled for a long time to figure out how we can get a P20 data system, but I feel like that's a really important role for the state. And if you have any sense of some hope and that to that end, I'd love to hear that, but or what we can do to make that happen.
He won't say. She might.
As everyone in the room knows, my boss has been very committed to the idea that we need to get our arms better around career and college readiness indicators, and that it needs to be part of our accountability system. It needs to be part of what's driving decisions at the local level. And yes, we continue to have a struggle with what data is available to us, whether or not it should or should not be part of CalPAD so that we can look at it longitudinally in order to make decisions at the local level. That authority all those linkages are not yet in the system. I think we have an uphill battle with our current governor in order to put those pieces of the puzzle together. So if we continue to all agree that that is an important piece of the puzzle that is missing, I think we need to be articulating it very clearly.
Let me just piggyback on the what Sarah mentioned about the interim assessments from Smarter Balance, which are, and Paul, this I guess particularly addressed to you, that are supposed to come out in the fall. And I assume that districts are really looking at this as a key element in preparing for the spring. But, you know, we didn't have many major problems with the field test, but that's not to say that will districts, it's a question, will districts be able to handle the interim test, which will be supposed to be given in the classroom with feedback and a quick response?
Well, I think we've heard from a couple of different people, this is going to be it is going to be a process. The digital library preview is open now. Teachers and other educators are giving feedback about it. So how does that play out? It's not completely developed yet, so we need to see where that's going to end up. Districts have the option of what they want to use in those interim assessments. So they're going to need to each take a hard look at what are we doing already? How is that aligned to Common Core? What pieces of this do we want to use? So it's even at a more beginning stage, I think, than some of the other pieces.
Actually, I was just, maybe to make myself clear enough, I was thinking just the capacity to do it on computers in classrooms as opposed to borrowing computers and getting everybody together to do a field test to satisfy that. It's a different level of technology. Observations, will some districts be able to take advantage of this and others won't? Or?
Well, that is one of the things that came up while the districts overall were satisfied. Their technology, as they said, performed as expected. That doesn't, maybe they had low expectations, I'm not sure. And we met them. They were very clear they need a better infrastructure. They need more staff and better trained staff to administer the tests. They need more bandwidth. They need more testing devices. So how is that going to happen? That is going to be a lot at the local level on how that happens. And in order, they did some places had to cobble together more than others and rent mobile carts that came in, but they did it. And it helped them identify where their needs are and what they need to do. And by being able to identify where those weaknesses are is the first step to figuring out what it is you need to do to get that fully implemented in your district, what you need to buy and what you need to do, and then how are you going to do it? So yes, it is more beginning stage.
I think let's not get collective amnesia either. For example, we know a lot about teaching reading in the early grades. We know that teachers do observations every day. I happen to be teaching my 5-year-old grandson how to read, so my head's right back into those early grades, right? It's about phonemic awareness. It's about sound symbol system, mapping the speech to sound. It's about reading aloud and helping them understand what stories are about. And it doesn't take a lot of technology to do that kind of early assessment, and those foundational reading skills that are so critical at pre-K through grades 2, we need to teach it early, we need to teach it well, and we don't need a lot of technology. We don't want to preclude students from having opportunities to engage, but great primary teachers have been teaching reading for a very long time. We know a lot about how to teach reading well, and let's not forget that that's central to all of the success going forward, along with the opportunities to engage all along the way with intervention. So I'm a little concerned, being an older person who's been at this a while. We're great initiators in our profession. We love to initiate new stuff, but let's keep track of the stuff that we know works and build on that, because that's the other part that makes our parents a little nervous, because we do know a lot about how to approach some of this curricular and instructional priorities, and let's build on that, leading to more sort of robust opportunities for learning.
And if I could just add, absolutely to everything Nancy said, and another cautionary note, we have to remember that success with the field test and with the technology necessary for that does not mean that we have the technology backbone or infrastructure for instructional supports. And we have to be so careful about not
Right.
confusing the two, that if there needs to be a further question of is, do we have the technology backbone that teachers want or need for leveraging whatever they need to do around the formative assessments, the interim assessments, but more importantly, the instruction day-to-day, and whether or not that bandwidth is there, because if we're taking away all the bandwidth to cram kids into the test, and and it has a negative impact on instruction in the rest of the school for weeks at a time, we've lost. So that's another piece of it.
Thank you for making that distinction. Yes.
Okay, this question may segue into the next panel, but I want to ask it anyway. Maureen White, California Community Colleges Chancellor's Office. I don't know, I see Mia. I don't know if anyone else is here from community colleges. Great, perfect, that's terrific. My question is, you have some very successful programs at CDE. You've got partnership academies, linked learning, and also I was part of the California Career Pathways Trust grant, at least the lead from our agency. So my question is, and I'm actually combining about 3 questions so that there's more time, is how is Common Core integrated, aligned with the successful programs you already have that are very career and college ready? And also, when I mention the Career Pathways Trust Grant, I'm also using that as a good example of what the United States Department of Education and Labor are putting into their grants. The grants that are coming out are really focusing on work-based learning. There's a lot of professional development. How are you aligning Common Core as part of all these successful programs and grants? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, one of the very first Common Core products that the CDE came up with was the revised career technical education standards that were aligned to the Common Core. I mean, that work to revise those standards was already underway when the Common Core were adopted. So the folks who were working, we've got different industry partners and education partners all working together to make sure that those new standards actually integrated the Common Core into them. So when you talk about all of these great, the partnership academies, the Career Pathways Trust, I think we feel really confident that a lot of the work that's going on there is very much academically aligned to the Common Core. That dovetailed really beautifully. That career readiness piece was already in place.
Kathy.
Hi, I'm Kathy Barron. I'm a reporter. And I wanted to sort of segue a little bit off what you were saying, Nancy, that we know what works. But for a lot of students in this state, it hasn't been working for one reason or another. And Common Core, along with LCFF, is supposed to really put some other supports in place for those kids. And I'm wondering if we have, looking at assessment of the whole thing, not just the individual students and Smarter Balance, but is there a sense of a definition of what success is at each level, where we're starting now, and where we want kids to be, and how we're going to know, how we'll evaluate, is this working under Common Core and LCFF for each grade level as we go along?
Well, the closest thing we have, the sort of next phase of the Smarter Balance, we're given the field test and the operation, looking at the items, is the achievement level descriptors now are for grades 3 through 8 and grade 11 within the context of if the standards define what it is that students need to know and be able to do, the performance levels, as we've called them, or the achievement levels are the other part of the continuum that says, how good is good enough. So the degree to which that work is happening this summer to help inform those involved in the Smarter Balanced, although the other consortium is doing that as well. And the draft achievement level descriptors, which are, again, I can get you that reference, takes each of the grade levels in literacy and mathematics and maps out what are the learning targets around the anchor standards, right, and the math practices. I mean, there's a lot of language in there. What are the 5 big claims that Smarter Balance is trying to assess in mathematics and in literacy, what then are those individual indicators at each grade level, grades 3 through 8, and then, of course, we have to look at pre-K 2 to sort of feed into that about, what does it mean to understand complex text, for example. What's the level of knowledge of fractions in 5th grade, moving on. So all of that language is there. What we have to, and we're informing that by the items on the field test, that's really a part, I think, of the system that moving into next year, teachers and administrators will have, okay, here's the content standards, here's the level of performance that on currently a 4-point scale, and I don't know if that will stay, Paula will know that, the degree to which in our old system, remember, when we went from below basic to advanced, we had some indicators and some marks. So grade level content is one piece of it. We'll have some more data on that. The other areas around intervention, around progress, around, we still have 180-ish school year. And we have students that learn at varying rates. So some summer school programs are now back in place. The extended time after school that provides more opportunities. So I think those are the pieces going forward that'll help us answer that question is, are we making progress and are students getting what they need?
So just one quick follow-up. As a parent, when you're talking to parents and they say, okay, there's not going to be an assessment, at least a statewide assessment for we don't know how long, how are you going to know in September, October, November? What are you going to be able to tell me about whether my kid is doing okay, if they're grasping the material, and if they're not, why not, and what you're going to do about it? What's the response to that?
Well, I think that's part of the, let's not get collective amnesia. We have parent conferences every fall where you meet at the elementary level, you meet with parents, you have report cards, we have grading periods. Those aren't the total answer, but let's build on the systems and structures that parents have become very familiar with, and let's also indicate for this grade level, here are the priorities, here's the content we're focusing on, here's how it's going to be sequenced through the course of the year, and we're going to be providing feedback both in the units of instruction along with those grading periods, knowing the summative test comes at the end of the year. But we have a lot of mechanisms, whether they've answered all the right questions, some of us would question, but we've got to build that structure and sort of make it a little more robust. I talked to lots and lots of districts who have been revising their elementary report cards this year to be better aligned, to provide more feedback for parents, to kind of try to map that ahead of time, knowing that, the accountability piece isn't there, but it's not as if we don't report on progress, and that's central to what we do in classrooms. So we've got to help parents understand we may not have all the pieces yet, but here's how we're going to give you feedback, and here's the important information your students are getting in the context of their instruction.
The other thing, back on your first question, but sort of how will we know systemically whether all this change has worked? I want to make sure we don't implicitly oversell what we're involved in. I think all of us would concur that the Common Core content standards are a significant improvement on the late 1990s standards we had, and they should result in students with deeper, richer understanding of the content. That's their goal. LCFF is arguably a more equitable allocation of resources, and the other characteristic that it has is resulted in decentralization of spending decisions from the state to the locals. But remember, under LCFF, there's not a dime more money in public schools in California than there would have been absent LCFF. It just redistributed money differently and arguably more equitably, but there's no more money. California still has the largest class sizes in the country. We still have the fewest support staff, nurses, counselors, librarians of anybody in the country. As Nancy said, our instructional day is still, I guess most places we may be back to 180 days, but in a lot of districts and in recession we weren't. So the public sector investment in public education didn't change as a result of LCFF or LCAP or Common Core or any of that. and we have to be realistic about what level of outcomes, transformative outcomes we can expect at the aggregate level of investment that we would have had anyway. So I just want to keep that in mind, too.
Thank you. I think we're now ready for our next panel, and thank you for your questions, and panelists, thank you for your wisdom.